Hey there, self-care warriors. Welcome back to Self-Care Haven. Today we're going to be discussing something that I know a lot of you are familiar with, which is the covert sociopath. Now, when I say sociopath, that is a layman's term for something that is often known as antisocial personality disorder. Now, sociopath can also incorporate some elements of psychopathy, so it's not necessarily all antisocial personality disorder, but it does, if there was something in the DSM that would describe what a sociopath is, the closest thing would be antisocial personality disorder. So let's look at the symptoms of antisocial personality disorder. Antisocial personality disorder includes symptoms like failure to conform to social norms with respect to lawful behaviors, deceitfulness as indicated by repeated lying, use of aliases or conning others for personal profit or pleasure, impulsivity or failure to plan ahead, irritability and aggressiveness as indicated by repeated physical fights or assaults, reckless disregard for safety of self or others, consistent irresponsibility as indicated by repeated failure to sustain consistent work behavior or honor financial obligations, and of course, probably the most important, lack of remorse as indicated by being indifferent to or rationalizing having hurt, mistreated, or stolen from one another. So antisocial personality disorder often can't be diagnosed until the age of 18, which is basically the protocol for any personality disorder. You can't really diagnose it until you're an adult because there's just so many shifts and changes in personalities over time. But usually if someone does meet the criteria for antisocial personality disorder, they will exhibit signs and symptoms of conduct disorder before the age of 15 or by the age of 15. So when you're looking at this list, you might think, well, my sociopath or the person I thought had antisocial personality disorder, wasn't that reckless. They held down a job, they were successful, everybody loved them in society, they did meet their goals, they were ambitious. And even though there were some red flags in terms of maybe, what they were doing financially, they were still able to hold it together. So that's when antisocial personality disorder doesn't really fit the entire picture, doesn't really represent the entire picture of what it means when you encounter a covert sociopath. Because a covert sociopath or a psychopath, and they're not necessarily interchangeable. There's a huge debate on, what does psychopath mean versus what does sociopath mean? Some people say that psychopath is more about genetics, you're born being a psychopath, whereas sociopath is more about the upbringing. Someone undergoes a great deal of trauma or something that changes the brain, that changes their outlook on life and changes the way they behave early on. So much to the point that it's hardwired by the time they become adults. So I'm not here to talk about that debate as much as just really clarify what I mean by covert sociopath. A covert sociopath is beyond just narcissistic, and being narcissistic is already a red flag, right? Being narcissistic is still a huge deal. When you are narcissistic, you don't have empathy for others. You're unable to put yourself in other people's shoes and perspectives. You exploit others for your own gain. You have this false sense of superiority. You're haughty, you're cold, you're condescending when you're a narcissist. That's already harmful enough. But when it comes to being a covert sociopath, it goes deeper, right? Some sociopaths can go to the extent of having this history of criminal activity, but other sociopaths may not have any history of criminal activity. So when they finally do get caught, it can be surprising to say the least. A lot of sociopaths are able to lie, deceive, and manipulate others, not just with a lack of empathy like narcissists, but with a lack of complete remorse. So this is to the level of malignant narcissism. Sociopaths and psychopaths all have narcissism in them, but they take it to a whole new different level, right? They are on a whole new level of callousness, cruelty, contempt. They have a grandiose sense of self-worth, a false sense of superiority. They seek power and control. They have a history of sexual promiscuity. They have problems with impulse control. They may have a history of early behavioral problems, even juvenile delinquency. They're highly promiscuous. They have numerous affairs. They lead double lives. They might relocate and move around a lot. They might lead parasitic lifestyle. They display superficial, glib charm. They're very charismatic, but they also have a shallow affect. However, this can be a deceptive trait because some sociopaths and psychopaths are able to pull off a very warm and loving persona for years without being caught. So you're only going to see that kind of shallow affect and the dead eyes and kind of that look of, you know, I'm dead on the inside. If you are watching very carefully, that level of contempt does come out in their facial expressions and their micro expressions. And I'll actually leave a link in the description box below to a documentary of the person I'm going to be talking about later on in this video, Scott Peterson, who does show a lot of joy on his face, and you could easily be convinced that he's a very happy, loving guy and high functioning, which he obviously is a high functioning psychopath or sociopath according to the experts. But you can see how quickly that joy turns into contempt, and it is scary. And it is you can see it in the time frame would be 2210, I believe. If you click to that time, you will see that transition and that micro expression of contempt. Psychopaths also are prone to boredom. They need high levels of stimulation, which is why they have all these affairs, why they engage in such risky behavior, why they're so promiscuous, why they tend to con and dupe others. It's all for a thrill, right? They are so bored that they constantly need supply. Just like narcissists, they're always on the hunt for supply, for new victims. However, theirs is a need that is insatiable, very like voracious. They want, they need. It's like it's their need. Just like us empathic beings, we have a need for love and affection. They have a need for stimulation. That's why they might do a lot of adrenaline raising. They might go skydiving a lot. Maybe they commit crimes that they get away with, engage in really dangerous activities. Maybe they, you know, speed. They just need that rush because everything else to them is just a game. For them, a relationship could be fleeting. They might meet you, they might love bomb you, they might make you feel like the top of the world. They might make you think that you're going to be their wife or their husband, and then suddenly the next day they just drop you like that, and there's no remorse, there's no sympathy, there's no empathy, there's absolutely no thought or consideration to your feelings. Now, narcissists can discard victims, obviously, too. They go through that idealized, devalue, and discard cycle. Sociopaths and psychopaths, they take discard on a whole new level, my friend. They are going to exhibit a cold callousness that is so alarming that it's almost as if you've never existed. Now, narcissists might hoover, they might check in. Psychopaths and sociopaths might hoover and check in if they need you, but for the most part, they can drop you without a second word. They can murder you psychologically or even literally. They can drop you, and it's just like that. They can drop you at the top of a hat if they need to. If you found out their game, or they're just bored, they need other supply, or you were too easy to dupe for them, or you were just a conquest, whatever it is, they'll drop you like that. So a lot of people ask me, like, what is the difference between a psychopath and a sociopath? Sociopaths are seen as more erratic in their crimes, and they have less impulse control. Psychopaths are seen as more charming, and they live a semblance of a more normal life. Sociopaths are seen as people who maybe had a traumatic upbringing or childhood that kind of shaped their behavior, whereas psychopaths, there's a focus on their genetics, right? They were born psychopaths. There's something abnormal with their brain. But either way, a lot of these terms tend to be used interchangeably. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to use sociopath, but just think of it as I'm using high-functioning sociopath as the term throughout this video, but that does not exclude psychopathy, right? I'm including psychopaths when I say sociopath, and I'm also including, obviously, malignant narcissists. Anybody who fits on the narcissistic spectrum, I am including in this video. I am going to be focusing on a high-profile case to illustrate some of these signs and how they manifested, but I don't want you to get confused or too focused on the terms itself. So that's why I wanted to kind of clarify what people think are the differences. But at the end of the day, a lack of remorse, a lack of conscience, a lack of guilt, a need for interpersonal exploitation, superficial charm and charisma, leading double lives, pathological lying, pathological contempt. These are all traits that exist on the narcissistic spectrum, some more than others. Narcissists have these traits already, but when it comes to sociopaths and psychopaths, they take it to a whole new level. Some to the level of criminal activity, and some to the level of leading double lives and conning and manipulating people for years. What's even more alarming about high-functioning sociopaths or psychopaths is that they can actually be very warm. They can be friendly. They can be soft-spoken. They can feel very harmless. When you're in the presence of a high-functioning covert sociopath or psychopath, you may be led to believe that this person is the greatest person on earth. And they tend to have a lot of social proof. Their friends and family are always giving them praise about how good and virtuous and kind they are, and that confuses you. That leads you into a lot of cognitive dissonance, because you're wondering, I'm dating this person who ended up having a double life, who has this significant other, and they've deceived me, or whatever else they did to you, right? You're thinking about this person and you're thinking, how can this person be so cruel, so callous, so cold, with no remorse, no conscience, no guilt about their duplicitous behavior? And you realize, oh, they garnered that social proof on purpose, right? They created this persona and character of themselves that is very virtuous, that is very moral, that does grandstand about these values like honesty and loyalty and transparency and integrity, right? But because they're so prone to boredom, they're always going to be looking for their stimulation somewhere, whether it's a crime, whether it's an extramarital affair. It doesn't matter what stimulates them, whether it's promiscuous sex. There's a lot of ways in which they get their stimulation, and they will never be able to cut out their thirst for interpersonal exploitation. And they will use their charm and use their charisma and use the ability to be a chameleon, to be a social chameleon, to morph into whatever you need and want and desire, to fulfill your needs at first, so that they can pull out the rug from underneath you and dupe you and con you. This is their game. They have lived their lives crafting this game, and they're never going to stop. So it's really important to remember that anybody can be a sociopath or psychopath. Anybody can be a malignant narcissist. Just because someone holds a high position of power or seems to be a very charitable person in society does not make them exempt from having no conscience. Now, remember, alarmingly high percentage of CEOs are actually psychopaths. So power and image and reputation doesn't necessarily mean that someone is with conscience or that they have empathy. In fact, some of the highest positions of power are occupied by people with no conscience, with no empathy. So we have to remember that it's not about their image, their name, their reputation, it's about their character. And if we really want to get to the bottom of who a person really is, we have to trust their behavioral patterns, more so than their personality, which can be very charming and soft-spoken and kind and generous, right? And they might have a lot of social proof behind them. But if their behavior towards you speaks an entirely different tale, it's morally reprehensible, it's marinated in deceit, it's covered with contempt, if it's tainted with pathological envy, if it's driven by the need to sabotage others, the need to control others, the need to dupe others, the need to be a master puppeteer to, this long line of victims, this trail of victims, then there is something going on there that is not in line with their image and the image that they project. Now, a lot of us think, well, if I was meeting a sociopath or psychopath, they would probably give it away by their dead eyes. I used to think the same thing, right? I used to think that, sociopaths and psychopaths easily give themselves away by that flat affect. Now, for a lot of cases, that may be the case. You will eventually see that flat affect. For more skilled covert sociopaths, however, you may not be able to tell because they are so warm, so loving, so caring that you really think that you've met the man or woman of your dreams, and then they morph into your nightmare. He or she is a charming, charismatic wolf in sheep's clothing, that can fly under the radar for the most part and can make people feel very much at ease when they first meet them. This is someone who is friendly, who's personable, who may grandstand about values like honesty, loyalty, transparency, integrity. If you haven't watched my 12 Common Lies of Narcissists and Sociopaths yet, please do, because that video tells you a lot of the lies that sociopaths, especially covert sociopaths, tell you early on in order to dupe you into thinking that they're this amazing, charitable figure. And this covert sociopath may actually be a very well liked and respected figure in society. This is the best friend of everyone. This is the friendly neighbor, your friendly neighborhood sociopath. This is kind of like Dexter Morgan, right? You don't understand that there is someone behind the mask that is that has these appalling qualities and characteristics. And so you're led to believe that the person that they portray themselves to be is the real deal. And you would never suspect that they would hurt a fly because they're able to masquerade as a very high functioning person. And these covert sociopaths are very high functioning. So that's what this video is really about, to really challenge the stereotypes of what a high functioning covert sociopath and psychopath would look like, and whether or not you would even be able to tell, because sometimes there are no red flags at the beginning, and even if there are, they might be able to fake empathy to an extent where you believe in them, right? Because remember, psychopaths and sociopaths and even malignant narcissists, they lack affective empathy, the ability to feel what you feel, but they do not lack cognitive empathy, which is the ability to assess how you might feel. So they can still fake their empathy. They can still fake having empathy. They might still say that they're sorry that this happened to you, and they may be so convincing, they might be very convincing wordsmiths. And the more covert the sociopath or narcissist or malignant narcissist or psychopath is, the more dangerous they are, because they can fly under the radar for years. Their friends and family and society might see them as this great person, but in reality, they are monsters. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. They have no remorse. They have no conscience. And they cause so much harm to so many victims that may never be able to speak out. So on behalf of those victims, I want to be able to uncover and expose the covert wolves in sheep's clothing that you may have in your life, or maybe walking around trying to dupe and con others. But most of all, if you feel that feeling of terror in your body that tells you that something is wrong, your gut instinct is often the first sign that you'll have when you are under the manipulating gaze of a covert predator like this. So let's talk more about the case that I think illustrates what a high-functioning sociopath looks like. Recently, I was revisiting and rewatching documentaries on the case of Scott Peterson and Laci Peterson. Now, if you're not familiar with this case, I will leave a link in the description box below so that you can watch some of the documentaries that are available on this case. Basically, in 2002, there was a very tragic and horrific murder of a 8-month-old pregnant woman, Laci Peterson, and in Modesto, California. And you know, they ended up finding out that it was the husband who likely did it, and it was also discovered that he had had an affair with a woman named Amber Fry, and she was crucial to this case. She is the one who came forward with the photographs of them together, basically around a month prior to Laci Peterson's death. And she had told police officers that Scott had confided in her, telling her that Scott had first misled her into thinking that he was single, and he eventually told her, well, I did have a wife, but this is my first Christmas without her. So he was basically foreshadowing Laci's death even before it had even happened, and he was kind of trying to act as if he was already a widow. So this was a sign that he had premeditated the murder. He wasn't his only extramarital affair, apparently. Even though Scott and Laci were either married or dating in college, he still had other girlfriends on the side who came forward later on. And so this was a man who had lived a double life for a very long time. He was obviously having extramarital affairs. He had no qualms, no remorse, no conscience about killing his wife in a very disgusting, deplorable manner, very grotesque manner, which if you're easily triggered by graphic violence, which I'm sure most of you are, I would not recommend watching the documentaries at length. If you want to get a brief overview, I would just recommend Googling it instead. But either way, it's a very triggering case. So I'm not going to go into the graphic details here. But basically there was justice for Laci Peterson eventually, and Scott Peterson was sentenced to death row. So this story calls to mind that picture of the all-American kind of covert wolf in sheep's clothing, right? Someone who presents themselves so differently from who they truly are. And these people are so manipulative and they are so pathological that their lies take a very long time to uncover. So Scott Peterson actually did something incredibly weird, which was very bizarre and unsettling to the police officers who had wired and tapped Amber Fry's phone while she was talking to him. Basically, she gave them permission to do so, and she was helping out in the case. And one of the phone calls Scott made to her was during the candlelit vigil for his now deceased missing wife, Laci Peterson, who, he was at the vigil, but he was calling his girlfriend, his, what people call mistress, but obviously Amber Fry thought she was his girlfriend because he had presented himself as single. He was calling his girlfriend on the side and telling her that he was in Paris, that he was around the Eiffel Tower celebrating New Year's Eve. And this was just so bizarre and shocking to the police officers who heard this story, because you're supposed to be mourning the fact that your wife is missing. You're supposed to be pushing forward the investigation, making sure the police officers are doing their job. And what is he doing? He's calling his other girlfriend, who he's been sleeping with behind his wife's back. And he's pretending, and he basically manufactured this story, this other persona of him being this very important businessman who travels a lot and is in Paris celebrating New Year's Eve. You are lying, like, the capacity to lie like that I have only seen in kind of like the sociopaths. In narcissists, yes, they do lie. They are pathological liars as well. But I think it takes a certain level of kind of sociopathic or psychopathic behavior in order to lie with absolutely no remorse. In order to make up the story while you are at the vigil of your deceased wife who you killed, and basically do so with no remorse. You're just laughing, you're joyful. This is not normal behavior, obviously. Now, narcissists, they thrive on the attention and validation of others. Sociopaths can also thrive on the attention and validation of others, but not just to boost their own ego, but to bolster their own existing sense of superiority over others. They feel so much power and control in duping others, in basically carrying out a lie that lasts for years and years and years and years. So a covert sociopath is the one who is more likely to be able to lie while looking you straight in the eyes. They will lie to you straight in the eyes. If they have a wife or a girlfriend, they will look at you and tell you, I'm looking for my significant other. Like, I want to find my life partner. I am ready for love. They will pretend they're a single man or woman, and they will lie to you straight to your face, just like Scott Peterson did with Amber Fry. Another thing that Scott did was that he courted Amber in a way that was overly romantic, right? I think on the first date, he had set up this candlelit room for her with champagne and roses, and he did that with a lot of the other women that he courted. He would give them all these roses, and it was just like a playbook for him. It was like the con artist's playbook. And we have that a lot in our modern culture too. We have pickup artists who are, skilled in the art of seduction, which, if you haven't read the book by Robert Greene, The Art of Seduction, I recommend reading it, or at least looking it up, just to notice the several types of seducers that he brings up, because a lot of narcissists and sociopaths can use those techniques, and for some of them it comes naturally. They can use those personas, especially like the persona of the ideal lover or the Casanova, and they can morph into whatever you want and pretend to fulfill your needs, all while leading a double life. The covert sociopath just like Dr. Martha Stout, like she notes in her book, The Sociopath Next Door, you know, one lie might be a mistake or a misunderstanding. 2 lies, you're getting to the, you know, danger zone. 3 lies is the linchpin of conscienceless behavior. That's what she says in her book, The Sociopath Next Door. So pathological lying, lack of remorse or conscience, those are the things that I would focus on if you're trying to identify whether you're in the presence of a covert sociopath like this, because they do lead double lives, and whether or not they're high functioning and successful or they have a history of criminal activity, it doesn't take away the fact that they have sociopathic traits, right? Because I think when people think of antisocial personality disorder, they think, well, my boyfriend or girlfriend or husband or wife doesn't have a history of criminal activity. They're very successful. They're the CEO of whatever. Remember, it's not about that, right? It's about that core lack of empathy. It's about that core lack of that core lack of remorse, right? And it's about that cold callousness that even though narcissists can possess, I think sociopaths take it to a whole new level, and it's a lot more dangerous than the abuse that perhaps narcissists dole out. They're all harmful in their own ways, so I'm not trying to undermine or downplay the impact of narcissistic abuse, but I do think that a sociopath is capable of so many horrific crimes, and it doesn't even have to be a physical crime, but all these emotional crimes of leading that double life for years, of duping others. Those are the types of things that they can do without blinking an eye, and they can look you straight in the face, and they can be friendly, personable, and the sociopath may be someone you never suspect. Just like Peterson was not suspected even by Lacey's family at first, because he was such a good man in their eyes, and he was someone who would never hurt a fly, at least according to them. But just think about how much premeditation it takes to do a horrific crime like that, and think about the callousness in which he acted the days after and the days prior to that. He was predicting his wife's death even before it had happened, which means that he had intended to do it in the first place. And his motives were as small as it's just more convenient than a divorce, basically. Just remember that the callousness, the coldness, the false sense of superiority, grandiosity, the pleasure at duping others, the sadistic pleasure at being the master puppeteer to all the puppets, and having all these sources of supply to not only gain validation and attention, but power and control. That lack of remorse is something that you will see not just with narcissists, but with sociopaths as clear as day, because they will look you straight in the eyes and they will lie to you over and over and over again, and you might buy into the lies for years. I hope this video grants some insight into the mindsets of covert sociopaths and their behaviors. If you have any insights as to the differences and the similarities between your garden variety narcissist and your covert sociopath, please leave them in the comment section below. I always look forward to your feedback, and I'll talk to you guys soon. Until next time, take care. Be sure to check out my #1 best-selling book, Becoming the Narcissist Nightmare: How to Devalue and Discard the Narcissist While Supplying Yourself, a #1 bestseller in personality disorders.